McCoy's condo complex has crumbling foundations. She's been pushing for testing for years and says this is a necessity.
Hello, I'm Debbie McCoy, Connecticut Concrete Queen, and today, on the heels of the three-part series on the two aggregate schemes, I'll be doing another 3 segments on stakeholders involved with the two aggregate schemes. The first aggregate scheme, as you will remember, was for victims of tainted aggregate used as hardcore fill that caused pyrite heave. The second aggregate scheme was for the victims of tainted aggregate used in concrete that made concrete blocks, which made entire homes. As I explained, both aggregates had harmonized European norms, which set out standards for the aggregates, standards that were never enforced, and no consequences realized by those who produce substandard aggregate and substandard concrete products. Only the victims of defective concrete blocks have realized consequences. Today, at this point in time, the magnitude, scope of the issue is too heavy a burden for the homeowners, industry, and the government. So rather than face evidence-based facts, the political party in power keeps the focus on the homeowner's shortcomings for lack of upfront costs or shortfall costs, and not on its own shortcomings for not providing protections for the housing consumers. In the first instance, the victims of pyrite heave caused by tainted aggregate and hardcore fill received the proper justice as well as the proper repairs. The homeowners formed a Pyrite Action Group coalition in the Dublin Meath areas, and the experts did extensive testing while representatives advocated for the victims and acknowledged the homeowners had no part in the damages. Therefore, it was on the government to mitigate the damages and make the victims whole again. In the second instance, the victims of defective concrete blocks caused by tainted aggregate in the concrete mix that makes concrete blocks have entire homes affected. They didn't receive the proper justice or the proper repair scheme, nor did they receive the acknowledgement that the homeowner had no part in the damages. Therefore, it should have been on the government to mitigate the damages and make victims whole again. In the first instance, you had engineers reaching out to geologists, photographers to learn the cause. In the second instant, you had a DOH minister who restrained any investigation by his remit for no testing to be commissioned. No apportioning blame, no testing, nothing. That remit of no testing took the victims of the second instant down a path that delayed understanding, progress, justice, and truth, and it brought about 3 barriers to the grant scheme that would leave victims stranded and trapped in homes for close to 2 decades now. The 3 barriers are upfront costs. In early 2023, the Banking Insurance Focus Group provided evidence-based information on what upfront costs were in actual basis. Shortfall costs, again, home after homeowner have stated the way the enhanced grant scheme is set up, it's not 100% redress, nor not even 90% redress. The shortfall costs, again, keeps homeowners from availing the scheme. This is punitive to offer something they can never accept due to the unattainable funds. Standard. The Irish Standard IS 465-2018 enabled the government from having to deal with the hardest hit county. One civil servant wrote to a DCC counselor and stated, "There must be many applicants you can move along that don't have parotite when discussing DCC's delay and processing applications for an entire year." What he was saying, based on IS 465's 2018, the suggested cause was MICA for County Donegal, and with MICA as the theory, the heavily led engineering scheme would do repairs based on options 1 through 5 due to a mechanical failure rather than the real cause, which is a chemical failure due to internal sulfide attack triggered by oxidized pyrite peritite. This is irresponsible because now it's gotten so out of hand. On the precipice a few years ago is now a full-fledged country humanitarian crisis. And this is not hyperbole. This is the fact by the number of counties now affected. Damage threshold. In order to avail the scheme, you have to get past the upfront costs, shortfall costs, Micah-Myth standard. You then must pass the damage threshold. With no understanding of the mechanisms for damages, that once the cracking appears, there's no arresting the process. It will continue expansively cracking and crumbling, but at an accelerated rate, making monitor at the site a monthly matter and not a one and done. When the home finally passes those 3 hurdles, the home can now be moved onto the scheme and deal with delay after delay. But by this point, the house's structural integrity is so jeopardized, the homeowner has no other choice but to abandon the home, and that means beg, borrow, or steal from Peter to pay Paul. This is abuse. This is disgusting. To mentally and physically trap a homeowner to a home that is defective, not of their doing. This is the most punitive form of abuse by the government. It's mental torture. The same folks who designed and advocated for a workable remediation scheme for the pyrite heave victims are the same folks who designed and advocated a not workable grant scheme for the defective concrete block victims, but rather designed for the government and industry approval. There has not been the same urgent response, and there is a lack of ownership. As I mentioned in the first instance, it was immediately acknowledged that the homeowners were not at fault, and government and industry took ownership. The government mitigated the damages at no cost to the homeowners. The insurance company paid for testing and engineer fees. The government set up a housing agency in 2012 that would work with a pyrite resolution board to implement and oversee a remediation scheme. And the industry moved quickly to amend SR 21:2004. Once they learned in the summer of 2007 that the cause was due to reactive framboidal pyrite in the aggregate. Understand this, a crisis does not pluck itself out of thin air. Rather, there is ownership for what caused the crisis, whether intended or not. But in all of this, like all the other building failures during the building boom, the homeowners are not to blame for the condition of their homes. Victims of tainted aggregate didn't produce the aggregate, didn't market the aggregate, and didn't test or not test the aggregate. They are not responsible. While I will give some face value that those who played their part in this perfect storm may not have done so with malice, we all know the term unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences has cost the government exchequer millions and millions of euros and will continue into the billions, and possibly when the sulfide dust settles, trillions of euros. If you count all the structures that have been affected, schools, daycare facilities, businesses, holiday homes, farms, it will surely cost trillions. And on a side note, at the Doll, Michael Martin stated recently, you can overregulate too. Really? There is no enforcing the regulations. All they asked in those regulations was to limit pyrite and peritite and the aggregate that was going to be used in hardcore fill and the aggregate to be used in concrete. Let's be clear, quarries are still of the status of self-regulation. There was no market surveillance on aggregates coming from quarries and no enforcement nor consequences for those who caused the worst disaster Ireland has ever encountered. I learned the term brown envelopes as I had never heard that reference until recently, and it makes you wonder why the party in power wanted no testing done and no apportioning blame. but they are okay with gaslighting the victims of tainted aggregate, making them look greedy for wanting to be made whole again because of the cost to properly repair is remove and replace. And that's the entire home. So, who are the stakeholders involved in both the Pyrite Heave IS 398 2013 and the Defective Concrete Blocks IS 465 2018? It starts at the top, of course, but the top doesn't stay in one place. It's called the Minister Shuffle. We are going to talk about the Department of Housing now, civil servants, housing agency, and the folks that were involved from the beginning that really, in the Pyrite remediation scheme, they acted with urgency, ownership, responsibility. Phil Hogan, Fingal, 2011, took an urgent look. Now, he was the DOH minister. He was new on the job, but he took an urgent look into the matter once it was brought to his attention in August 2011, when Homebound informed the minister they would no longer cover damages to Pyrite Heave. Shortly into his role as Minister for Housing, he made a naive comment about it being a civil matter. However, once the minister realized the magnitude, with reports coming out stating the propensity of 60,000 damaged homes due to reactive pyrite in the aggregate, he had decided it was no longer a civil matter. It was a matter for the government to make these homeowners whole again. Minister Hogan established a Pyrite panel in 2011 to look at the problem that arose, suggest remedies for the problem, and make suggestions to ensure that similar problems might never arise. The Pyrite panel took at face value two things. One, quarry operators had no idea they were dealing with reactive pyrite at the time of sourcing for hardcore aggregates. Two, engineers' curriculum at universities in Ireland didn't cover geological disasters such as Pyrite Heave and defective concrete due to reactive iron sulfides. The Pyrite panel. What happened in the case of pyrite clearly illustrates the devastating problems that can arise on a huge scale when a number of conditions coalesce to form the perfect storm. Those conditions still persist. At the time Hogan was minister, there was a collective of advocates, both in government and in the coalition, and it was a political time when human disaster of unattainable costs was empathetically offered to victims of tainted aggregate. And truthfully, I believe everyone took ownership of their part in solving the issue, government, industries, and homeowners. Remember, the industry with SR 21's amendment, the government with an end-to-end no cost for the homeowners, and the homeowners' commitment to being out of their home for 12 weeks and trusting the government to make them whole and the market value restored. Many folks believe the proximity to Dublin and the cost to the exchequer has a lot to do with the disparities of the two aggregate schemes, and I tend to agree. How else can you explain the attitudes of those confronted with facts, confronted with science, confronted with sites, confronted with pleas, confronted with the EU Commission, confronted with fears from stories repeated daily in the news? How else can a tendered, indemnified consulting engineer usurp another engineer's safety analysis based on site visits, test results, and is an IS 465 registrant, who factually finds it impossible to get indemnity insurance because the insurance adjusters are not willing to take the risk of anything less than option one, demolish and rebuild? And what has happened with the consulting engineers? There have been over 100 downgrades, if not more, and they've been downgraded from full demolition and rebuild to a less costly option, saving the exchequer money but not the homes. Not the home's mortgageability, saleability, or insuranceability. By leaving defective concrete blocks and foundations in place, it traps the homeowner, further leading them down a path of appeals and more delays, while their home worsens with every delayed day. This isn't mitigating the damages. This is a grant scheme aimed at nothing more than saving the executors money, but leaving victims with little hope and a lot of despair. Most, if not all, are feeling the consequences of an improper scheme due to improper sources and improper enforcing. Traumatized are the children living in constant fear of death by their house falling down around them. Demoralized are the adults living in a house not fit for purpose who can't get the upfront costs or shortfall costs to rebuild their home. Who do those in power want to protect? The housing consumer over the industry that has caused the most costly disaster in all of Ireland's history. Here are the folks from the Housing Agency and Department of Housing who played a part in both the first instant tainted aggregate used for hardcore fill, IS 398, and those same folks who played a part in the second instance tainted aggregate used in concrete, IS 465. As well, the Attorney General's advice. Please see letter dated September 7th, 2021. Coincidentally, just a few weeks before the working group established in June 2021 by then Minister Darren Hogan had to submit their report due September 30th, 2021. What's coincidental about it is September 7th, 2021, the Attorney General referred to wanting to read the report from engineer Mr. Paul Ford. However, in the DAL, Mr. Ford mentioned that the minister hired him in January of 2022 to be the chairperson of the expert panel. Prior to biographies, John O'Connor, Dublin City Council during 2001-2005, executive manager, 43 victims of tainted aggregate and hardcore fill. Leo Vatriker, Fingal County Council, 2,231 victims of tainted aggregate in the hardcore fill. Damon English, Meath County Council, 843 victims of tainted aggregate in the hardcore fill. That's, they moved very quickly to help those with the tainted aggregate and the hardcore fill. They moved very quickly to make sure there were no costs to the homeowners. And the folks that created that remediation scheme did it with pure thoughtfulness and they thought of everything. John O'Connor, from his biography, is widely, and I mentioned this in the last show, John O'Connor is the most used and worked man in government, okay? He's the busiest and most used, and you'll learn from my researching him. So, John O'Connor is widely considered to be one of the most knowledgeable and experienced people in the Irish housing sector and is known for his collaborative approach across all sectors, public, private, and not-for-profit. John is the former Chief Executive Officer, the CEO of the Housing Agency. Previous roles include Chief Executive of the Affordable Home Partnership, Executive Manager of the Housing and Communities Department in Dublin City Council. He also worked in construction industry before moving to local government. He is a chartered engineer and holds qualifications in other areas including governance and project management. John has served on a wide range of boards and committee and as chair on a number of these. Currently, he serves on the program board for international protection. Also, please see the Housing Commission in profile. The Housing Commission held its first meeting in January 2022, having been established under Housing for All. The commission is made up of 12 members, all of whom are experts in the housing sector. John O'Connor, chair, is the former CEO of the housing agency. John O'Connor, from 2001 to 2005, executive manager at Dublin City Council. 2005 to 2012, chief executive officer at Affordable Home Partnership. 2012 to 2021, CEO at the Housing Agency. 2021 present, chair Housing Commission. Minister Phil Hogan, at the end of 2012, established an informal Pyrite Resolution Board. The members were Paul Ford of DBFL, Sean Ball of NSAI, John O'Connor, assigned chair of the informal PRB, and CEO of Housing Agency, Carolyn Gill and Matt Gallagher. The purpose of the informal PRB was to oversee the implementations of a comprehensive remediation scheme for private dwellings affected by significant pyrite heave. John O'Connor was on the formal Pyrite Resolution Board as chairman in 2014, 2015, 2016. He was also on the working group formed in June 2021, July, August, and September, with the report from the group due September 30th, 2021. John O'Connor was also in the email chain sent to me in August of 2021 by the working group, where they asked my advice on peritite because I have lived through it here in Connecticut. John O'Connor was asked to co-chair the expert group that Minister O'Brien formed in January 2022, February 2022, March 2022, and April 22, along with Chairperson Paul Ford and co-chair Martin Lynch, General Manager of the PRB. John would be in charge of the second grant, the 40-year guarantee under the enhanced scheme. Martin would be in charge of the damage threshold, and Paul would be in charge of certification of remediation works. That's great, but the housing manager in his remit narrowed the asks. I think they had like 80 asks, and he narrowed it down to he whittled it down, cherry-picked 6. John O'Connor, in January 22, was chair of the Housing Commission established under Housing for All, whose first meeting was January 2022. Now, he's meeting in the expert group in 2022. He's the chair of the Housing Commission in 2022. He's back on the Pyrite Resolution Board in 2022. And that was in July 22, was back on the Pyrite Resolution Board, and by September 22 was chairman designate, followed by chairman of the board. John O'Connor attended the international conference in November 2022, where I questioned Mr. O'Connor on why the 40-year guarantee was for options 2 through 5, when option 1 required keeping foundations in place and had the same material. He said he'd look into it. It's still not part of the 40-year guarantee. The option 1, full removal and replacement, leaves the foundations in that has the same material. So folks are damned if they do or damned if they don't. If they don't test the foundation and they build a new home on it and the foundation turns out to be affected, they cannot have that second grant. And damned if they do, and they, out of their own pocket, spend the $10,000 to $30,000 it costs to remove and replace the foundation on top of the rebuild, and then it turns out that the aggregate was not oxidized. Either way, it costs the homeowner. It's punitive. Mr. O'Connor attended the international conference, like I mentioned, and then by 2023, John O'Connor is in the steering group established by the housing minister. Also in 2023 and 2024, John O'Connor was the chairman of the PRB, along with Michael Lynch, who's been chairing it, who's been the general manager since 2019. John O'Connor's work with the two tainted aggregate schemes is very extensive. He's done a lot. He was also made the homeowner liaison in February of 2022. So I don't know how he fits all these roles. I mentioned he wore a lot of caps in the government, but homeowner liaison, in the beginning, in the working group, maybe even in the expert group, he gave and offered advice. But from what I've heard recently, he's void of meetings. So they need a homeowner liaison that's not overworked, overused, but I would like to see John O'Connor advocating for the homeowners of DCB like he did for advocating for the pyrite heave victims. Martin Lynch, a property manager in early 2000s, regional property executive, project development manager, project manager, senior engineer for 6 years to housing agency, 15 years, and general manager of the pyrite remediation scheme on the Pyrite Resolution Board in County Dublin. Martin Lynch, in February 2019, met with reporter Carolyn Lumsden and exchanged emails from March 2019 through May 2019. I was included in a couple of these emails where I explained what was happening in Connecticut with homes affected by peritite. I asked Martin Lynch to attend the United States International Conference to be held in October 2019 along with Canada. Martin Lynch, 2019 Housing Agency, General Manager of the Pyrite Resolution Board. The housing agency administers and implements the Pyrite Remediation Scheme on behalf of the Pyrite Resolution Board. The PRB and Homebound Agreement, Project Management, Testing, Support Services, and Supplemental Agreement, non-pyrite related costs. Martin Lynch, General Manager, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, and signed the most recent PRB annual statement with John O'Connor, April 30th, 2025. Martin Lynch was the co-chair of the expert group established in January 2022 through April 2022, when he was in charge of the damage threshold, along with John O'Connor and Paul Ford. Martin Lynch's work with the two tainted aggregate schemes is extensive. Paul Ford will be in the second segment with Engineer Ireland Engineers. However, his 20 years involvement with most of the stakeholders in both aggregate schemes makes him a man of interest, especially since he was on the informal PRB board with John O'Connor, Sean Belf, chair of IS 398, 2013 with Sean Belf, Aidan O'Connell, John Wickham, at the Pyrite Symposium in April 2012 with Dr. Brian Hawkins. He's in the Hawkins book, he wrote a chapter in it about the structural engineer's perspective. He attended the CIF briefing in August 2014 with Hawkins, co-chaired the expert group with John O'Connor, Martin Lynch, testified at the Dahl 2022-2023. He's in the Attorney General's letter, September 7th, 2021, who mentioned waiting on Paul Ford's report 4 months before Paul Ford was asked to chair an expert group in 2022. He was also chair of IS 398, co-chair with Dr. Michael Mayer. So if you were to draw a circle and put Paul Ford in the middle and do lines out, he knows everybody and has worked with everybody. He's the second most used and most worked man in government. Very bright, so is John O'Connor, and they work so hard. I give them so much credit for what they did for the victims of Pyrite Heave. They worked their butts off, as did Martin Lynch. But now all three of them are in the expert group advising the minister. But unfortunately, that Attorney General letter I mentioned of September 7th, 2021, carried so much weight. John Wickham, chartered member of Engineer Ireland and chartered member of the Institute of Structural Engineers. In his current position as Senior Advisor, Building Standards in the Department of DOH, he leads a team supporting the implementation of building control reform agenda, the provision of a strong and evolving building code in support of quality construction, sustainable development, and compliance with EU requirements. Building reform has been a key priority for government since 2011. Really? Okay. John Wickham's part of the Building Standards team presented at the Irish Building Control Institute, IBCI, annual conference, March 28, 2012. He was the speaker at that. John Wickham has been on all 5 committees, IS 398 Part 1, IS 398 Part 2 in 2013, IS 398-1 with the revision in 2017, IS 465 2018, and he has been on the IS 465 review from 2021, 22, 23, 24, and 25, and still going. John Wickham has assisted the expert panel in 2016 to 2017, and as I mentioned, in 2018 on the technical committee, number 63. Engineer Ireland Seminar, Dublin, February 26, 2019, an essential update, masonry and rendering, standard overviews, along with Connor Taff, manager director at Homebound, who is also on all 5 committees. And he spoke about workmanship and the overview of the IS 465 Register of Professionals. Just keep that in your mind. The IS 465 Register of Professionals, because later the Attorney General is now allowing the registered IS 465 engineers to have their reports usurped by the housing agency consulting engineers. Something is wackadoodle, okay? Paul Benson on the working group in June 2021, July 21, August 21, and September 20. Oh, now I've moved on to Paul Benson. I apologize. John Wickham assisted the expert group in 2022, January, February, March, and April, and he has testified at the DAL as well. John Wickham's work with the 2 tainted aggregate schemes is extensive. Paul Benson, Senior Executive Officer, 2001 to 2012, County Mayo. Director of Services, 2012-2015, County Mayo. Head of Housing, 2015-2018, Mayo County Council. Housing Delivery Office, DOH, Principal Officer, 2020 through 2023. He's no longer in DOH, per Simon Dolphin's comment to me in May 2024 at the International Conference in Canada. So Paul is no longer in DOH. Paul Benson was reported in the Donegal Daily November 14, 2021 article. Department officials said Mica campaigner just wants to cause a scene. 2 emails sent by a housing authority official in Era to Mica campaigners show the disdain Department of Housing officials has for those affected recent claims. The emails seen by the Sunday Independent, full report by Rodney Edwards, and Sunday Independent were meant for his colleagues, but instead were sent to Mica homeowners, department officials, and Housing Minister Dara O'Brien in recent weeks. Paul Benson was mentioned in a Business Post article October 5th, 2022. Row between officials, further delays, MICA redress for Donegal homeowners. Both sides are understood to be frustrated with the other over the delays, with DOH unhappy at the slow pace at which the authority is processing applications. Meanwhile, the council is determined to await guidance from the government over whether it can factor in the presence of parasite when deciding the grant money a homeowner will receive. Benson wrote to council, "There must be many applications where parasite or a combination of deleterious materials are not a factor." Benson said it was important that the council make decisions on the applications before it. But here's the thing. They couldn't make any decisions because IS 465 is saying the cause is MICA. The cause. And remember, I told you there's 3 barriers for the homeowners to get onto the scheme. And one of them is the standard only recognizes MICA as the issue in County Donegal, when in fact, the issue is internal sulfide attack triggered by oxidized reactive pyrite peritite. As I mentioned before, Paul Benson is no longer in the Department of Housing, which I learned last year while attending the International Conference in Ireland. These segments will show how, in the first instance, there were ownership and taking responsibility. Government and industry took ownership and responsibility and acted urgently, like with the amendment to SR 21. In 2007, they learned in the summer. They met in October of 2007, and by December 2007, they had amended SR 21. The speed in which it acted, once learned in 2011, and the conclusion of the Pyrite panel to form the opinion that at no cost to the homeowner, because its investigation proved the homeowners had no part in sourcing for aggregate. They bought a home in good faith, and the home was not fit for purpose, and the government made them whole again, while the insurance industry helped contributing to testing costs, project managers, technical support, and additional help with non-related pyrite issues. I want to talk to you again about Phil Hogan. I have before me an article, October 7th, 2013. Prairie Hall families to have mortgage debt written off and a new loan issued. Families who lost their homes in the notorious Prairie Hall development are to have their mortgages written off. The former residents whose lives have been ruined by the debacle for over 2 years will be handed pre-approved mortgages on their new homes. So, Mr. Hogan said that the framework of the deal that had been put to residents recognizes the exceptional and unique difficulties faced by homeowners in Prairie Hall. There were 90 families affected. And a spokesperson for Dublin City said, "We have received the minister's statement and will continue to work with all parties concerned to resolve the Prairie Hall issue." Labour Party councillor in Dublin City, Brian McDowell, stated, "The residents of Prairie Hall have lived through 2 years of hell and are looking for solution which allows them to move on with their lives is good news." They've had a solution for Prairie Hall, 90 homes affected. Now, they've got, I think, 8 or 9 homes affected in Elm Park, where Professor Paul Dunlop resides. And they were flooded in 2017, and it was bad. And what happened was these homes are in a flood zone, and they're damaged by peritite. And the parasite is not stopping or delaying while they play around and politricks around. These homes need help now. They did the Prairie Hall under exceptional conditions. Why can't they coalesce and do that for the folks of Elm Park in County Donegal? I didn't get to the Attorney General's letter because, and I've said it like many times, I will get to it and I will read most of it. But with only 15 minutes left, I don't think I can do it justice. So today's segment was regarding folks like John O'Connor, Martin Lynch, Paul Benson, John Wickham, Phil Hogan, and the housing agency. Who I didn't get to is Minister James Brown, Minister Dara O'Brien, and Minister Damon English. That will tie in with the Attorney General's letter that he wrote to Dara O'Brien, making sure that he understood stringent conditions would need to be put in place so that there wouldn't be too many applications. It's hard to believe, but it's true. And then I will be talking in the next segment after I finish with the Attorney General and the housing ministers. I'm going to be talking about NSAI, Sean Balfe. He was on the PRB informal. He was on the PRB formal. He even was chair at one point. He is on the review, and he was suspended. I'm also going to be talking about engineers Damon Owens, who sent a submission in September 2021 to the working group. He was also in that same email as John O'Connor, and he was also very much a part of the expert group that was formed in 2022. He was also promoted in 2022 to Director General of Engineer Ireland. So I will be speaking first of Damon Owens. He's a very bright man, compassionate, but he's stuck in a hard spot now that he's Director General. He's expected to toe the line, and he also understands about the mechanism that's destroying the homes in County Donegal. Paul Ford, I've mentioned him. He's extremely bright. They have him in the Dahl testifying. He's been expert witness in court, and he's been involved with everybody. Aidan O'Connell, he's been on all 5 committees. I don't really understand his arrogance, but, whatever. Damon McKay, he's the engineer that, spoke to all the homeowners in 2013 and let them know that they had issues with mica, even though in the first instance, even though before that meeting, he said the cracks were similar to the cracks in County Mayo. Well, County Mayo is being affected by tainted aggregate with framboidal pyrite. Pyrite and peritite, when oxidized, it is similar. It's map cracking. It's the second mineral formation. It's the indigite, the thaumasite, the expansive cracking, the strength loss in the blocks. Ambrose McCluskey, he's a hero to me because he spoke up when it wasn't popular to do so. But early on, now the first scheme for defective concrete blocks that was passed in 2019, regulated in 2020 in June, by June 2021, folks marched by the tens of thousands, marched to Dublin. That's a long hike, over 4 hours of driving, but they took bus after bus after bus. thousands of people came out to let the government know the scheme was not, their 90-10 scheme was not working. It was more like 60-40, and even today it's more like 60-40 with the shortfall costs, with inflation, with the construction, with the price gouging. Martin Doherty, another engineer that speaks truthfully. He let everyone know in the article that I'll quote from that he felt the engineers were being channeled in to picking option 5 or option 4, which was equated to be the same amount as what the pyrite remediation scheme was, where it started out 45,000, then 45,000 euro to 50 to 60 to 70. Now it's at 95 euro, 95,000 euro. I'll be talking about Thomas Campbell, another one of the heroes, because he worked with Paul Dunlop. I think he even worked with Paul Ford because they thanked Aidan O'Connell and I believe Thomas Campbell for assisting the expert group. So he spoke about all the homes that he'd seen and that the majority of them have peritite. Sean Ball, who I mentioned earlier, he's with NSAI, so I'll be talking about him. I'll also be talking about the first wave, James Lombard, Mike Eaton, Brian Hawkins, Thomas St. John, Michael Mayer, Fred Schremer, Alan Bromley, Robbie Goodow. You know what's funny is Paul Ford knows everybody, all of them. He's worked with James Lombard, Mike Eaton, and Brian Hawkins, Thomas St. John. He was at the Pyrite Symposium with them. He's in Hawkins' book with them. He's on the expert group with Martin Lynch, general manager of the PRB, and John O'Connor, the chairman of the PRB. And now those three guys are the expert group advising the minister on fixing the enhanced scheme. But the enhanced scheme is not workable. That was the first wave. And then the second wave of individuals are Dr. Andres Lehman, Dr. Benoit Fournier, Dr. Josie Duchesne, Dr. Kurt Astley, Dr. Kai Viley. Many of the second group were with me in 2022 when we came to Ireland. They also were there just recently, and I was there, as you know, 2 months ago. So with that, I will be discussing everybody that's been involved in this, but I wanted to talk about all 42 of them in 1 hour. And I would not have done the justice due if I talked about all 42, because I would be talking at a speed that would not be understood. So I had to break it down to the Department of Housing, Housing Agency, civil servants, then break it down to Engineer Ireland and the frustrations that the homeowners are feeling that their engineer that they hired, that report, that decision to demolish and rebuild the home was usurped by the tendered, indemnified consulting engineers. Their engineers are on IS 465. They have no indemnity insurance because insurance won't allow it. And I even remember at the Doll, and I'll get to that when I speak about Aidan O'Connell and Paul Ford, but in 2022, I think it was Aidan O'Connell who mentioned in the testimony that he said something to the effect that he thinks him and Paul are the only two engineers that have that insurance. So anyways, what I did was I have this all broken down. And today I only came with this stack of papers. Here's John Martin, Paul Benson. Oh, here's that Attorney General letter that I want to get to. Michael Martin and his little comment about we can over-regulate too. We're talking trillions of dollars to repair everything that's been damaged by tainted aggregate. And he had the audacity to say in the Dahl recently, we can over-regulate too. When a TD, a senator, was asking him about stricter quarry testing, about enforcing the actual regulations on the books from the EU, where it states in EN 12620, peritite 0.1%, pyrite 1%, but even that's an issue now because framboidal pyrite is found to be as damaging as peritite, and they say it should be around 0.2% for framboidal pyrite. So we're still in the thick of it. We're up to our knees in it. And if people don't start coming together and deal with ownership and responsibility, this is going to last for 200, maybe 300 years. That's how long it's going to take to rectify it. Because right now, in 5 years, they've repaired 229 homes. Of those 229, only 120 homes, 121, have had the full demolition. But then here's where the rubber hits the road. That full demolition, did they take their foundations out? Are they damned if they do or damned if they don't? This is the question. And this is why I sent my friend, a geologist in Pennsylvania, to Panjana, a sample of a foundation from a woman that I am friends with in Ireland. She just sent his, and it cleared customs, his sample, the sample, so he can test the foundations of her home because she paid to have the foundations removed. Did she have to? Would the foundation have crumbled with the same material? We don't know. Not enough information has come out about the foundations, and yet 121 have removed them. But here's the kicker. The insurance is now asking, no, if you didn't get a full demolition, if you didn't remove the foundations, you're not a good candidate for being insured. So the scheme, the first scheme, the pyrite remediation scheme, that was so well thought out. They have over 3,000 homes repaired in 10 years. Since they started in 2015, they did 5 houses. They did them just so that they could know how it was going to work, right? And then 2016, they really got into it. They about 200 and something. I said it in the last segment, how many homes each year were fixed. And it was 200 to 300 a year. Now, in 10 years, they have 3,000 homes fixed. Remember, the last segment I told you, in 5 years, they did 73% of their applicants. In 5 years, this enhanced scheme, this 90-10 scheme, did only 7%. So you tell me, does that excuse the homeowner's frustration? I mean, really? Because there's a senator that really doesn't like the spin. He feels this scheme is fine. But Senator, the scheme is not fine. You have 3 barriers that is keeping homeowners from availing the scheme. And that damage threshold, that is so punitive, it disgusts me because they are trapped in that home until their house gets so badly damaged they can finally avail the scheme. And when is IS 465 going to be amended? Thank you. And I'm taping today, December 17th, right before Christmas. I'd like to say Merry Christmas, but this won't air until January. So I'm going to say Happy New Year and thank you for tuning in. And next segment, I'll finish out the housing ministers. Thank you and goodbye.